David blinked in the darkness, a slight shiver coursing through his body as the alarm clock blared at 3:17 a.m. He sat up dimly, recognizing the blinding light outside the window, mingled with the resounding noise of traffic. The feeling of confusion intensified as he reached for the lamp to illuminate the scene. What lay outside was nothing like the dream he'd had. His beloved SUV, the trusty vehicle that had accompanied him through countless foggy mornings, was being approached by a heavy-duty tow truck, flashing lights from an ambulance, and police car streamed toward the Green Acres apartment complex, the place he'd chosen as his sanctuary to embark on adulthood. David couldn't believe his eyes. A mix of bewilderment and anger surged in his chest. The orange cone marked code violation loomed like a painful wound, as if it were pointing at the failure of how he maintained his simple life. David could hear the calm voice of the officer, but it felt like an echo from a distant place. "I'm sorry, but this vehicle is being towed for a violation set forth by the HOA." Those words weighed down on him like a heavy stone. HOA, Homeowners Association. Those people he had heard much about from neighbors who always griped about the strict rules they were bound to follow. But now it was directly affecting his life, and the sign felt as obvious as the blooming Karen flowers scattered all around. He felt a pang of resentment as he recalled the disagreements stirred up by the HOA chairperson, Karen. With her forced smile and cold glances, Karen had become a nightmare to the residents, an individual who recognized no boundaries and was always ready to criticize. Just the slightest misstep or an unappealing arrangement, and she would appear like a princess wielding light and order, but in reality, just a capricious dictator enjoying control. After the police left, David sank onto the sofa, his mind utterly bewildered. He gripped the remote, tightly unsure of whether to turn off the TV. Life had passed by uneventfully, but now the heavy silence around him felt oppressive. The air in the small apartment was no longer pleasant. An ominous feeling had crept in. Wait, he told himself, starting to search for information about the appeal process with the HOA. Do people really have to endure such scrutiny? He pondered whether anyone in this neighborhood had ever dared to stand up against Karen and her rigid regulations. David had once loved this apartment complex. The proximity to amenities, the tranquility and the friendly neighbors had made him feel like he was living in a perfect movie. But now, all the glamour had been overshadowed by Karen's petty absurd actions. The weekend BBQs, the picnics among residents had turned into anxious conversations about who among them would be targeted next. As the first rays of dawn broke, David decided he could no longer sit idly by. He had had enough. The result of apathy. The silence of each individual had enabled Karen's abuse of power. Perhaps it's time to stand up, he told himself. I can't let this continue. David sought to connect with other residents to arrange a meeting. He realized he couldn't fight against the unreasonable rules alone. A sharp mind could make all the difference in the face of a united community. That might be the only way to change the tide and restore the beloved neighborhood to a stable course where everyone could live in peace. Anger and empathy surged within him as he noticed the budding Karen flowers in the sunlight. They resiliently endured every hardship, radiating vibrant life. From today, I will no longer be a victim. David silently vowed to himself and to the new life he intended to start. The sight of his SUV being towed, coupled with the feelings stemming from Karen's oppression in the past, ignited a new fire within him. David had no idea that this was just the beginning of a battle, not only for himself but for all the residents of Green Acres, a fight against the abuse of power by people like Karen. From then on, the days that followed would not be easy, but before him, David bore a steadfast determination, and like the Karen flower unafraid to bloom amidst the parched grass, he too would rise. On an ordinary morning at Green Acres apartment complex, David was surprised to see the bright aspects of life around him. The sound of birds chirping, the first rays of sunlight streaming through the window, and the fragrance of flowers from the nearby small park made him feel lighter. However, this peaceful picture would soon be tainted by darkness. Since moving here, David felt he was part of a livable community, where everyone had the freedom to express themselves. But that feeling didn't last long when he actually faced the presence of Karen, the powerful president of the Homeowners Association, HOA. Karen was a woman with a notorious reputation in the neighborhood. Rumors about her being a difficult matriarch spread rapidly. Behind her sweet smile and gentle face, Karen always carried an air of severity and a set of stringent rules that she imposed on every resident in the complex. Every time David opened his door to look outside and saw the lawn meticulously trimmed to the trees, neatly lined, and the lush green space, he felt proud of where he lived. But just one small incident reflecting that image could shatter everything in an instant. David began to realize that the moment he believed he had found a true home was also the moment the HOA's regulations overshadowed everything. One day, upon discovering some dry leaves on his lawn, Karen immediately sent a warning to David demanding an immediate cleanup. In her eyes, everything had to be perfect according to her standards. This was something all the residents in the neighborhood were aware of, but very few dared to officially oppose. This only made David feel more upset. He did not want his life to become entertainment for anyone, nor did he wish to construct policies around the unreasonable ideas that Karen proposed. Karen displayed constant surveillance by frequently walking around the neighborhood, her sharp eyes and bright smile making everyone feel watched. Every time David saw Karen passing by, he reminded himself not to let her influence his life. However, very few understood the sense of helplessness when their rights were violated. As the situation worsened and the regulations became increasingly harsh, David gradually recognized that Karen's presence was not only a personal burden, but also a common concern for all the residents here. Those individuals who once lived peacefully and harmoniously were now thrust into an unwanted struggle with their very representative. This feeling of dissatisfaction, initially just small conversations in the kitchen corner or the backyard, gradually spiraled out of control and transformed into public discussions during HOA meetings. Eventually, David decided he had to take action. He could no longer sit idly by and watch Karen continue to manipulate everyone's lives. He began collecting information from other residents, listening to stories of heart-wrenching experiences, from unreasonable warnings to bizarre regulations. Each story was like a piece of a puzzle in the picture of power abuse that Karen had constructed. However, confronting Karen was no easy task. David's and other residents' efforts often became fraught with challenges due to Karen's stubborn and self-satisfied attitude. It was their determination that gradually led the community from a state of confusion and hopelessness back to strength. They started organizing meetings to discuss, share opinions, and create solutions for the ongoing situation. Their voices were no longer suppressed. Conversations began to expand, forming a strong bond of solidarity. David understood that to put an end to this hardship, not only did he need to stand up, but there also had to be unity from the entire community. He recalled the joyful moments of outdoor barbecues, the childhood fun of the kids, and the laughter echoing throughout the neighborhood. That joy had become the breath of life here, and he was determined to hold on to it. Facing the power of the HOA led by Karen was not just a battle for himself, but for everyone. David told himself that if they all stood together, their voices would be stronger than anything Karen could impose. The first step in the fight was to create a safe space where every resident could freely express their opinions. From there, they would not only be fighting for a particular issue, but for a long-term ideal, where the community was genuinely respected and everyone could live by their own standards without fear of criticism or oppression. On this arduous journey, David understood that every battle had its price, but the allies he found alongside him would be the strongest in this long quest. Together, they would write their own story and fight to reclaim their right to live freely in their beloved home. David, with his gentle and intelligent nature, always believed that every problem could be solved with calmness and reason. However, as the presence of Karen, the president of the HOA, became increasingly oppressive, he realized that some things could not unfold the way he hoped. Tension began to brew when Karen, with her serious expression and neatly tailored blazer, happened to walk through the neighborhood on a Sunday morning. David, watering the plants on his porch and savoring the fragrant scent of roses, felt the discomfort in the air as Karen paused, her sharp gaze sweeping over the garden with scrutiny. "David, I see there are a few flowers here that do not meet our standards," she said in an undeniable tone, as if declaring a verdict. "They are not of the type approved in the HOA regulations." David was taken aback, dropping the watering can. "But they are local roses and they are beautiful. Why can't they be here? They may be beautiful, but they do not fit within the design plan for the area. If you do not comply with the regulations, I will have to report you." Karen replied, her lips curling into a smile that did not reach her eyes, which offered no hint of concession. From that moment, David realized it was not just the flowers that were under Karen's control, but his entire life seemed to be at her mercy. She continually sought reasons to punish residents, turning each day in the neighborhood into an endless struggle. HOA meetings became arenas where everyone had to defend themselves against the barrage of accusations from Karen and her allies. David understood that he could not simply sit back and accept this situation. The sense of being stifled, unable to live freely, propelled him to the decision to take action. He began to form a group of residents to support each other in coping with Karen's wave of pressure and to bolster solidarity within the neighborhood. Each week, David organized small gatherings in the park near the apartment complex. They shared stories of their painful experiences under the HOA's pressure, from Karen's unexpected inspections to baseless violation reports made via phone calls. These stories not only served as a means of psychological relief, but also ignited a fighting spirit in each person. The greatest source of motivation came during one of those meetings when an elderly resident, Mrs. Clara, recounted how her daughter had been kicked out of a community event merely for a scheduling error that had not been communicated in advance. "I used to think I should remain silent and not cause trouble. But now I realize that silence has made us victims." She said, her eyes shining with determination. "We need to stand up." David felt the power of solidarity in Clara's words. The residents gradually recognized that they were not alone, and strength came from mutual support. They began to plan for a special HOA meeting where they could outline the issues they were facing and put an end to Karen's tyranny. When the day arrived, the atmosphere in the HOA meeting room was tense. Karen dominated the space by asserting the regulations she deemed inviolable, but the residents under David's leadership were well prepared. They equipped themselves with documents disproving Karen's accusations, ready to present them before everyone. "I don't want any of us to feel weary or afraid because of Karen's actions. We have the right to live in this neighborhood freely and feel safe." David proclaimed, his voice full of resolve. "This is not just about flower regulations, it's about how we are treated. We deserve to have a voice." One by one, people began to speak up, denouncing the misconduct and abuse of power by Karen. As the atmosphere grew more charged, Karen tried to maintain her composure, but her eyes betrayed her anxiety. Suddenly, in some way, the residents' solidarity began to crumble, the sturdy wall Karen had built over the years. This battle made David realize that life is not just about the individual, but about the community. Mutual protection creates strength, and the courage to stand up and speak the truth is essential in a truly just society. He knew that the fight against Karen had only just begun, but hope sparked within him and his fellow residents that they could effect change. David stood frozen in place as he realized that his SUV was no longer in its usual parking spot. The night before, he had parked in a designated area, utterly confident that he had adhered to all the regulations set by the management. But now the vehicle was gone, leaving only an orange cone marking the transgression. It felt as if he were trapped in a nightmare, dark thoughts racing through his mind like a tsunami crashing onto the shore. As he rummaged through his mind for a reason why this had happened, David couldn't help but think of Karen, the HOA president, who was always ready to intervene in any situation to salvage it, even if her methods were somewhat excessive. The murmurs he had heard from other residents about Karen's tyranny and strictness made it impossible for him to remain silent any longer. Anger surged within him like an unquenchable flame. After a few hours of fruitless searching, David decided to call the police. He had to take action to retrieve his vehicle, even as an increasingly unsettling feeling washed over him. When he heard the voice on the other end of the line, he tried to remain calm, but his anxiety was palpable. The officer asked him a few simple questions and advised him to wait a bit longer, as they were currently overwhelmed with work, assuring him that he would soon receive news about his car. Despite not seeing any light at the end of the tunnel, David refused to accept defeat. He clenched his fists, resolute not to allow Karen to continue abusing her power. If he did nothing, his SUV would not just be a vehicle, but a symbol of failure and the silence of the community's residents. He not only needed to recover his car, but also to stand up against Karen's authoritarian behavior. Determined to see this through, David began gathering information. His conversations with neighbors over the past few days became the building blocks of his fight. Everyone had similar stories, ranging from enduring unreasonable penalties to being unable to freely utilize their living spaces. The unfairness of the situation seeped through their tales, igniting a flame of unity in the community. As evening fell, David finally received an update from the police. His vehicle had been found in an unauthorized parking lot not far away. The relief washed over him quickly, only to be replaced by frustration when he realized that Karen's interference had led to this confusion. He couldn't just sit back and let this situation unfold. His determination pushed him to the decision to bring the matter to light. He needed to call the police to the location of his car. However, true to Karen's nature, she had not taken her eyes off the residents' activities. Entering the parking lot, David came face to face with Karen. She stood there, a self-satisfied expression on her face, as if she were the one ensuring justice in every situation. Although he had the chance to explain, Karen refused to listen. She simply declared that David's actions had violated the regulations and furthermore had endangered the community. He felt this injustice land like a painful punch to his gut. "You have no authority to call a towing service without giving me the opportunity to explain," David stated, his tone firm. Karen maintained her almost haughty demeanor, countering David's criticism with convoluted rhetoric, obscuring the truth with nonsensical reasons. "I'm only doing what's right for the safety of everyone," she emphasized, as if that justified torturing the residents as a form of self-defense tax. But David could not let this confrontation end without action. Alongside his growing frustration, his patience had reached its limits. Other residents began to gather around, many of them showing support for David. The chaos between the two sides quickly erupted. Karen's justifications faded against the mockery and outrage from the residents. It was then that the truth about Karen's actions began to unfold. Utilizing video footage from security cameras in the area, David and a few friends started gathering evidence that could demonstrate that her interference was not only unlawful, but also disruptive to the residents. This was not merely about retrieving a car, it led to a broader investigation into Karen's abuse of power. And this struggle continued for months in a charged atmosphere. The fight was not just an individual confrontation, it was a testament to the strength and solidarity of the community. David knew that if he and others did not rise up at this moment, Karen's tyranny would persist and could worsen. He could not accept that the peace of Green Acres depended on people recognizing the power of intellect, truth, and unity. Thus, the battle between David and Karen was no longer merely about an SUV. It had transformed into a symbol of resistance and standing up for the rights of every individual in this community. Determined to seek justice, David was fighting not just for himself, but for all those who had ever endured the tyranny of others. When David reviewed what had transpired, his mind felt as though it were caught in a storm. His SUV had vanished, and he could not stop thinking about how everything had spiraled out of control. His heart raced at the thought of what would have happened if Karen hadn't stopped there. Everything had turned into an unending battle, where a solitary being like him stood almost no chance of holding out. At that moment, David decided that silence was not the solution. He had to take action. First, he called the police to report the incident. As he recounted the entire story to them, from his SUV being towed away to Karen's tyrannical actions, he felt a glimmer of hope. This could change. The police promised to investigate the situation and take the necessary measures. However, Karen's interference seemed unstoppable. When David and the police arrived at the towing site, they found his SUV abandoned in a secluded corner. The signs of Karen's abuse of power were more evident than ever. It was not just a vehicle. It represented the disrespect she had shown to the entire community. Standing before his car, David felt a mix of relief and outrage. Just as they were preparing to retrieve the vehicle, Karen suddenly emerged from the shadows with an unmistakable air of self-satisfaction. "I did my duty. I can't let residents like you ruin this area," she declared in a domineering tone. David looked directly into Karen's eyes, seeing through her facade of confidence. "True, but this isn't about protecting the neighborhood. It's merely a way for you to assert your power," he countered with a determined tone. His breath quickened, yet courage overcame fear. This was not just his fight, it was a struggle to defend the rights of everyone in the Green Acres neighborhood. He could not allow Karen to continue dominating their lives with her unreasonable rules and actions entirely dependent on her personal power. After a heated argument, the police decided to retrieve the SUV and asked Karen to explain why she had called the towing service without notifying David first. Surrounded by witnesses, local residents were actively monitoring the unfolding events. Murmurs spread among them, their glances filled with skepticism directed at Karen, who no longer held their trust. "I completely followed the procedures," she continued to assert, but her tone grew weaker under the scrutinizing gaze of the gathered crowd. Some residents began recording her actions with their mobile phones. The crowd stood in stark contrast to her stubbornness. They were exhausted from Karen manipulating everything to suit her desires. As tensions reached a peak, David resolved he could wait no longer. "You have abused your power, and it needs to stop. Now, I am not alone in this fight." From the back rows, dozens of residents stood up and began to rally behind David. They raised their voices not just to defend David, but to reclaim the respect they deserved. This catalyst created an atmosphere entirely different from their previous encounters with Karen. Karen felt the pressure mounting. She even attempted to justify her actions by citing HOA regulations that had been voted in years prior. But like a refreshing breeze, the savvy residents began scrutinizing each detail of those regulations. They realized that rules should not be enforced without the consensus of everyone involved. The tense dialogue between David and Karen unfolded like a scene from a movie, except no one knew the ending. Yet now everyone understood they needed to stand up and could not let a tyrannical individual abuse power simply because of established rules. One resident spoke a line that resonated deeply in everyone's minds. Power is not the key to respect. It is how we treat one another that truly determines our value within this community. In the end, the truth was laid bare, and in a moment of clarity, David realized that his fight was not just to reclaim his SUV, but to change an entire system. A system where the issue was not merely rotten fruit, but the decay of the human spirit when people accepted unnecessary abuses of power. Unexpected allies stood by his side, and together they looked towards a brighter future, one free from difficult women like Karen, where connections could be made not through stringent rules, but through compassion and mutual kindness. At the HOA meeting, a tense atmosphere enveloped the cramped hall. Residents gathered in large numbers, their eyes fixed on Karen, the newly appointed president of the HOA. Seated at the head table, her expression remained cheerful, but her eyes betrayed her concern. With the power she wielded, she had abused her authority to declare violations without providing clear reasons. The haunting obsession of Karen's control had left many residents feeling bewildered. David stood in a corner of the room, his heart-racing emotions swirling within him caught between excitement and resolve. This was his chance to stand up, not only for himself, but for those around him who had endured Karen's oppression for too long. He had prepared carefully motivated, not just by the silence that had prevailed until now, but also by the rekindled spirit of community solidarity. The meeting began, and Karen stood to speak, her voice authoritative yet defensive. She expressed that everything she had done was for the good of the neighborhood, yet the disappointment from the residents was unacceptable. Her tone brimmed with self-satisfaction as if everything was just and reasonable. However, David's steadfastness wouldn't allow him to remain silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," David began, his voice firm yet gentle. "I've continuously tried to convince myself that Karen truly had good intentions in her regulations, but that is not the reality." The gazes of the residents in the room began shifting toward him, their attention fueling David's courage, urging him to speak more forcefully. "The HOA regulations have become shackles, stifling our freedom, and one person's abuse of power is more than enough. It's time for us to stand up." Karen abruptly interrupted him, asserting that the documents and videos he mentioned were distortions. But David was ready for this response. Under the table, he pulled out a laptop and connected it to the screen, raising the suspense in the room. "I have accessed video footage from security cameras around this area," he said, and images began to appear. "Let's see what really happened when my SUV was towed away." The room fell silent as the footage played vividly, capturing Karen's manipulation, from calling the towing service to the disrespectful remarks she had made towards David. A wave of reaction surged from the residents. Whispers and looks of astonishment and outrage filled the air. David felt the spirit of the community shifting. Those who had been oppressed were finding their voice. Karen, realizing her plan was slipping away, began to resist. "That's a misunderstanding," she yelled. "I was just doing my duty. You all know these rules are necessary to maintain harmony in the neighborhood." David wouldn't allow Karen to continue distorting the truth. But harmony cannot come from fear and oppression. We need to build a community based on mutual respect, not through the draconian rules you impose. David's words carried power and passion, piercing through the hearts of everyone present. Residents began to speak up, one after another. An elderly woman stood and said, "I once trusted Karen, but now I realize I was wrong. We shouldn't allow this abuse of power to continue." Applause erupted, the encouragement from the residents igniting the ideals of freedom and justice. As the atmosphere became increasingly charged, Karen could no longer maintain her calm demeanor. She appeared flustered, her eyes losing their confidence, replaced by panic. The comments from residents escalated, particularly from a young woman who suggested forming a group to oversee the HOA's activities to ensure no one could exploit their power. Ultimately, the meeting seemed to spiral beyond Karen's control. She forced a smile to dismiss the criticisms, but the mounting evidence turned against her. Gerard, a prominent resident with a strong voice, concluded the event with a decisive statement. "We lived a good life before these regulations. No one can drag us down into a pit of fear and anxiety. Let us stand together." As the meeting drew to a close, a decision was made. Karen was temporarily suspended until a final decision was made regarding her actions. It was an unforgettable evening, not just for David, but for the entire community. They had stood together in one space confronting truth and justice. David's SUV was no longer merely a vehicle. It had become a symbol of the fight to reclaim power from abusers. They learned that power is truly strong only when it is monitored and controlled by those it affects. The entire space in the HOA meeting room at the Green Acres condominium was saturated with tension. Under the soft yellow glow of the chandeliers, residents listened intently as Karen, the HOA president, with her haughty demeanor, spoke to justify her actions. Her smooth words could deceive some, but no one could be mistaken about her true nature anymore. "We all know that safety and order are essential for maintaining the value of this neighborhood," Karen declared, gently stroking her sleek hair. Her gaze swept over the crowd as if searching for approving nods. "I just want to ensure that every resident follows the community regulations." But one thing was undeniable. David's patience had reached its limit. He was tired of hearing the deliberately vague excuses Karen was using to justify towing his SUV. Those like Karen, who wielded a bit of power, could no longer exploit anyone so easily. With strong determination, David stood up and stepped forward, his eyes blazing like fire, striking straight into Karen's complacency. "Karen, you have abused your power." David said, his voice clear and serious. "You are not only harming me, but also causing division and concern within this community." The confidence in his words seemed to inspire others among the residents. People began to murmur whispers of agreement, and nods echoed around. They saw the pain and helplessness that David had endured, and now they were unhesitant in standing with him. A former lawyer in the neighborhood, Mr. Mitchell, stood up, his tone solemn. "I have witnessed this abuse of power more than once. Karen has not only violated regulations, but has also infringed on everyone's rights. We need to rise up and demand justice for all of us." Karen's face paled as she realized David's victory was not just a matter between the two of them, but had transformed into a struggle for the entire community. Her eyes widened in panic as she saw the solidarity from the surrounding residents. They began to share their own stories of the pressures and anxieties that Karen had created, the unreasonable regulations and the criticisms they had endured. "We have had enough of how you run the HOA." A young mother spoke up, gripping her chair tightly. "I don't dare let my child play outside for fear that you will find a reason to criticize me. That's not fair. We don't need an HOA president who is always looking to create conflict." Another resident added, their voice filled with outrage. "We need collaboration and support, not fear every time you show up." Karen flustered. Each word from the community felt like knives cutting deep into her pride. She was all too accustomed to silence from others, and now the unexpected resistance left her unable to uphold the image she had fought so hard to build. Yet, amidst the charged tension, the videos from the security cameras that David brought became the first page of an unwritten book. The clear images evidencing Karen's wrongdoings served as a vivid testament to what they were fighting for. As the screen lit up, every gaze turned to the damning footage. The atmosphere in the room became suffocating with shock, as people could hardly believe what was unfolding before their eyes. The image of Karen casually pressing the button to call a towing service without hesitation became indisputable evidence. Everyone fell silent for a moment before the cheers began to rise. "That's right. This is how you hurt us." As the truth was revealed, the light in the residents' eyes sparkled. They had found their voices, and now no one could stop them. From that moment on, Green Acres would not only be a place to live, but a symbol of freedom and fairness in life. And in that moment, as the auditorium brimmed with emotion and unity, they collectively unveiled a new light for the future, resolutely determined not to allow people like Karen to continue oppressing and abusing power in this neighborhood. They transformed their pain into strength, moving together toward a new page filled with hope and freedom. When the HOA meeting concluded, the atmosphere seemed to turn still, yet the thumping hearts of hundreds of residents echoed all around Karen. Her once arrogant demeanor, now unmasked, sat huddled in a corner of the room. Her downfall came not only from the stark contrasts in her gestures and words, but also from the solidarity that the community had shown in standing up against the abuse of power. David, holding the case file, couldn't help but reflect on the efforts he had expended in dealing with Karen. The sleepless nights, the endless anxieties, and the tense conversations with neighbors had now culminated in a resounding victory, one that went beyond merely reclaiming the SUV. Behind this result lay a deeper lesson about power responsibility and the strength of unity. The residents in the neighborhood did not just see themselves in David's story, but they also felt a sense of liberation they had never experienced before. The images on the screen of Karen, now a symbol of power abuse, made them realize that David was not the only one who had grappled with the harshness of the rules she had imposed. Each one of them had once remained silent in the face of oppression, accepting injustices out of fear, convenience, or simply to protect their own peace. The evidence David had gathered, the security camera footage, not only exposed Karen, but also helped the residents recognize that they could change their lives if they banded together. They could create a community where every voice was respected, where each individual's efforts were valued. As Karen faced the legal ramifications of her abuse of power, what mattered was not just her punishment, but how the residents learned the value of courage. They observed that no action was too small to incite change, and that even the smallest voice could create ripples. David felt a sense of serenity as he watched those around him, animatedly discussing future plans. They were not merely looking to overthrow an individual. They aimed to rebuild a sustainable community. Meetings were organized to discuss the establishment of new regulations, to ensure that no one could ever misuse power like Karen again. These rules were not just restrictions. They were principles to maintain harmony and mutual respect in the shared spaces. With the resurgence of courage, social activities began to blossom. Residents organized barbecues, charity events, and sports gatherings. These occasions not only brought people closer, but also fostered a joyful, positive atmosphere. They realized that when everyone united, every challenge could turn into an opportunity for growth and bonding. The fight against Karen forged a powerful momentum within the community. Those who once felt intimidated now learned how to stand up and fight for what was right. They shared their own stories, experiences they had previously kept to themselves. Trust was rebuilt from simple conversations to significant decisions shaping the community's future. As the legal consequences began to rain down upon Karen, the residents did not view it as a personal victory for David, but rather as a collective triumph for all. They had courageously stood together against the abuse of power, and above all, they had learned the value of unity in their community. In retrospect, David had not only reclaimed his SUV, he had helped spark the fire within each resident of Green Acres, reminding them that their strength lay in unity and determination, not to succumb to injustices. And in that moment they realized that at last they had found their own voice. People began to feel proud for standing up against the abuser, and that pride began to resonate throughout the community. In the light of recent events, everyone clearly understood that from now on, they were no longer alone in the fight to safeguard their rights. They had become a resilient community with an indomitable strength, ready to rise up whenever a similar situation arose. At the end of this chapter, a single word could encapsulate everyone's emotions. Hope. Hope for a brighter future where every individual is respected and the right to live is safeguarded for all. The SUV was no longer just a vehicle. It had become a symbol of victory and communal power, a reminder that they could and would take control of their lives. In light of recent events, the solidarity of the residents of the Green Acres condominium has become a symbol of the very spirit of community. The difficulties and struggles faced were not merely David's story, but have transformed into a shared concern for all. From witnessing the SUV being towed to observing the abuse of power, each resident has traversed a journey together, embedding in their minds the reminder that they are not alone in the fight against tyranny. After Karen was suspended, the atmosphere in the neighborhood seemed to breathe a new life. Residents began to meet more frequently, engaging in conversations, sharing personal stories, and getting to know one another. No longer were there wary or fearful glances. Instead, there was openness, trust, and a spirit of sharing. They understood that what mattered was not just one individual rising up against injustice, but rather an entire community united together, living peacefully and justly. To embody this spirit, a community meeting was organized at the playground of the condominium. Everyone was excited, discussing what they could do to create a more comfortable and friendly living space. David was chosen by the residents to lead the meeting. He stood up, his eyes shining with zeal, and began sharing his ideas. Folks, we have witnessed much in recent times. We must change not just for ourselves, but for future generations. What we have experienced has awakened each of us to the necessity of solidarity. None of us want to witness anyone being oppressed or subjected to arbitrary control, as was the case when Karen was the president of the HOA. It is us, the people living here, who have the right to determine the course of our own lives. David said, his voice strong and filled with emotion. Everyone listened to him with acute attention. The youthful faces brimming with enthusiasm, and even the older individuals with rich life experiences, all felt a strong motivation from David's words. They collectively discussed plans to organize annual events and friendly gatherings, creating opportunities for everyone to connect. They decided to form a support group where all residents could easily share their concerns and opinions, helping one another in every circumstance. Proposed social activities were plentiful, ranging from picnics to volunteer programs, aiding the surrounding community. The people of Green Acres realized that not only did they need to foster solidarity within the neighborhood, but they also needed to connect with nearby areas, building strong relationships with the greater community. They called on friends from outside the neighborhood to join these activities, extending their network of solidarity even further. On social media, images from meetups, joyful laughter, and the vibrant energy of residents spread. They were no longer just a simple condominium, but had transformed into a paradigm of solidarity and equality within the community. Their stories were a testament that standing up against injustice and abusive power would not only bring immediate change, but also serve as a stepping stone toward a better future. Many residents began to become voices representing the community, even participating in local elections, to ensure that the neighborhood's issues would be heard and addressed. They realized that decisions were not merely in the hands of one person, but were a collective assembly of all members within the community. Autonomy and the right to vote were not just opportunities to speak up, but also the responsibilities of each individual. Being part of this journey, David felt that he was not just fighting for the SUV, but for the rights of everyone. He no longer felt alone as before, but recognized that the support from those around him had given him strength and confidence. Now, people respected him not only for his courage, but also for his efforts to build a cohesive and vibrant community. Ultimately, the events they organized together became an annual festival where everyone could showcase their talents, culture, and friendships. Food, music, and various sports activities were organized, creating a vast space for families to participate and forge beautiful memories. The spirit of cooperation and mutual respect generated an unexpected strength for the Green Acres community. The story of David and the residents of Green Acres stands as a vivid testament that when they stand up and take control of their lives, they reclaim their freedom and fairness. From here, they learned that in a society, solidarity is not merely a choice, but an essential condition to protect what belongs to them. On the road to restoration, each individual became an indispensable part of the larger picture painting, a vibrant tapestry of community strength. Every resident of the Green Acres apartment complex has had a memorable experience from recent events, and the shock from Karen's actions has imparted a lesson deeper than anything they could have imagined. In retrospect, they not only see the rule violations that Karen imposed, but also realize that silence and compliance can lead to serious mistakes, not just for themselves, but for the larger community as well. In the days following the HOA meeting, the residents' spirits began to recover gradually. They started to meet each other more often, sharing feelings and stories related to this event. A sense of reinforcement, support, and sharing permeated the atmosphere. Every slice of cake, every cup of tea, and every conversation became a bridge connecting people closer together. They recognized that it wasn't just David standing up against Karen's abuse of power. The entire community had the opportunity to raise their voices, affirm their own power, and embrace the freedom in the area they had chosen to call home. A meeting was organized not only to discuss the harshly imposed rules and regulations from before, but also to create a plan to rebuild unity within the community. People began discussing organizing community activities such as weekend festivals, outdoor gatherings, skill-sharing workshops, and support groups. They decided that solidarity would be the guiding light for the future, and that no one among them would feel lonely or abandoned again. David became one of the leaders of this discussion, though he didn't see himself as prominent or noteworthy. The power of his actions and courage in his struggle earned admiration from many residents. He felt a new responsibility not just to protect his own rights, but also to safeguard the rights of everyone. On a beautiful afternoon, as the golden sunlight filtered through the leaves in the small park of the apartment complex, David stood before a crowd of residents and began to speak. He shared his story about the anxiety and humiliation of having his privacy violated. "We are not just fighting for the SUV," he said. "We are fighting for the right to live in a community where every voice matters and is respected." David's words ignited a fire in the hearts of the residents. They exchanged confident glances, and a strong spirit of solidarity began to form. They understood that if they did not speak up, they risked leaving a gap for others to continue abusing their power. Together, they resolved to hold a community conference where everyone could express their thoughts, feelings, and ideas. The conference took place the following day with many residents in attendance. They discussed a wide range of issues from internal regulations to ways of fostering community cohesion and protecting one another's rights. Every voice and viewpoint was heard with no one silenced by fear or judgment. The atmosphere of the conference became lively, and trust and understanding gradually took shape among those participating. They preserved the lessons learned, reflecting on personal experiences, while acknowledging that anyone could find themselves in similar situations. They decided to establish a support group to maintain listening and helping skills, and most importantly, to encourage everyone to bravely stand up against injustice when they encountered it. From then on, they began organizing sharing sessions where everyone could voice their opinions without fear. These meetings not only fostered an atmosphere of unity, but also became a source of motivation for those who had previously felt lost or powerless. They learned that each individual holds value, and that everyone's contributions are essential for the community's robust development. This process not only helped the residents regain their confidence, but also laid the foundation for a sustainable community. Sharing was vital, but it didn't stop there. They needed to build a culture of mutual respect where everyone felt comfortable speaking out and embracing differing viewpoints. It was these very differences that enriched their lives and helped them understand and grow. Ultimately, the Green Acres community transformed from a mere place of residence into an extended family. They had overcome hardship together and rediscovered their strength. Gone were the harshness of Karen and the walls that obstructed interaction and sharing. Now, they had become an inseparable part of each other's lives, walking together toward a brighter future. This journey was not only about ending the abuse of power, but also served as a profound insight into the strength of solidarity. Each person among them realized that the pathway to becoming a strong community lies in accepting and learning from each other's mistakes. No one is perfect, but together, they can create something miraculous. In the warm atmosphere of a weekend day in Austin, Texas, the residents of the Green Acres apartment complex gathered together to attend a special ceremony honoring David, the man who had been thrust into a fierce battle with Karen, the woman whose rules had turned their lives into a series of harsh regulations and unusual scrutiny. Now, David was not just a resident of the apartment complex, but a symbol of struggle, courage, and the desire for freedom. People arrived early, the lively and excited atmosphere permeating through every laugh and intimate conversation. They brought along sweet cakes, fresh flowers, and soft music that played, creating a loving and united environment. Each fragment of the community held within it a piece of history, a part of the story about the frustrations they had endured under Karen's control. As David stepped up to the podium, he could clearly feel the loving and supportive gazes from everyone around him. He was no longer a person oppressed by fear. Now before them, he resembled a brave warrior, just returned from a difficult battle. With the community's support, he had found his voice again. David began to speak, his voice calm yet heavy with meaning. "Hello, everyone," he said, his eyes scanning the familiar faces present in the crowd. "Today, we are not just celebrating a victory. We are commemorating the strength of unity and courage. It's been a long journey that all of us have shared together, not just me." As his courage resonated with the crowd, David led them into the story of his experiences. He recalled the difficult days when Karen's rules were like walls blocking everyone's freedom. None of us truly expected this to happen. We only wished to live in harmony, to have our own homes, and to be respected as human beings. But Karen's presence skewed that David shared. He paused briefly to let the memories sink into the minds of the listeners, then continued. "However, thanks to the solidarity of each and every one of you, we stood up. Not for an SUV, but for the right to live freely, the right to express our voices without fear or judgment." Emotions surged and supportive voices echoed. People nodded, touching one another, understanding that this was not only David's story, but their story as well. They had faced hardships together and had collectively sought the light from the darkness in which they once lived. David continued to talk about the importance of speaking out and resisting pressure. "We often think that a small voice might not have much impact, but looking at what we've overcome, we realize that each voice together creates a powerful sound. That is our strength. That's why I decided not to remain silent and to take action." When he referred to the months they faced criticism and snarky comments from Karen, he felt a resonance from the crowd. "I don't want you to feel like you have to showcase yourselves. Don't let others define your worth. Each of us deserves respect and to be heard. David's speech touched every soul, igniting within them a yearning for freedom and justice. He concluded with a very special message. Always stand up for what you believe in. Never let anyone extinguish the fire within you. Our solidarity has proven that we all have strength, and justice will always prevail when we stand together. The ceremony ended with prolonged applause and cheerful cheers. Each individual carried with them a renewed belief, a powerful motivation to continue building a community where every voice is heard. The event not only paid tribute to what they had endured, but also opened a new beginning for all. They understood that unity was the greatest strength and a solid foundation for the future. Looking up at the blooming Karen flowers, David knew that their community had now been reborn. They had not only fostered harmony but had built a place where people could freely express their personalities without fear. We have written our own story, and that is the most beautiful thing, David thought to himself, a radiant smile blossoming on his face. Under a clear blue sky with gentle sunlight flooding everywhere, David stood up alongside the residents of Green Acres, a place where faith had once been shaken, but was now overflowing with hope. The Karen flowers, which had become symbols of the struggle against harsh rules and abusive power, bloomed vibrantly in the sunshine. They represented not only floral beauty, but also resurrection, a yearning for freedom and the unity of the community. David and his neighbors decided to document their journey through painting stories and the lessons they had learned over time. They organized a special ceremony where everyone shared thoughts, feelings, and hopes for the future. This was not merely a simple ceremony. It was a promise to the future, a beginning for new dreams. During the ceremony, David stood before the crowd, his gaze resolute. He recounted the ups and downs that he and the residents had experienced, the anxious days faced with the power of Karen, the excited and nervous emotions of breaking the wall of silence together, and the strong resurgence when they decided to stand up for themselves. We are not just fighting for an SUV, David began, his voice passionate. We have fought to restore human values, to reclaim the right to live and be respected in our community. Each of us has the freedom to express ourselves without fear of surveillance or unreasonable rules. Every word David spoke echoed in the hearts of the residents, reminding them that unity is strength. Through the doubts, fears, and difficulties they had faced, they had found a new way of living, a fresh perspective on their relationships with one another. They were no longer isolated individuals in a neighborhood, but a family, united and strong. Daily life in Green Acres had become richer and more vibrant. They began hosting barbecues, artistic activities, and cultural performances. Each event was an opportunity for people to socialize, connect, and understand one another better. The Karen flowers stood not just as symbols of struggle, but also as signs of friendship and the cherished moments they shared. David was also keen to encourage everyone to participate in managing the neighborhood by forming a new residents' leadership committee, where every decision would be made based on consensus and collective knowledge. Together, they began drafting a charter outlining the rights and responsibilities of each resident, creating a fair and civilized living environment. The children in the neighborhood felt the change too, becoming key players in nurturing this spirit of unity. They organized excursions, teaching one another the values of friendship sharing and helping each other. Their perspectives on the blooming Karen flowers, the stories their grandparents often told, and the beautiful memories they were creating together began to shape their understanding. We rise to restore what is right, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. David continued, his voice full of emotion. When we place our trust in one another, when we support each other, nothing can hold us back. Let our story become an inspiration for other communities, a guiding light for those still silent. The ceremony concluded with enthusiastic applause and jubilant cheers. David felt the love and solidarity in the air, where the Karen flowers had become symbols of resistance, yet also of strength and hope. He wondered if this was the end or the beginning of a new journey. The answer lay in their hands, in the hands of those who had once stood up and would never stop dreaming. As the sunlight faded away, the Karen flowers continued to bloom in the neighborhood, a reminder that life can be more beautiful when we fight together for what is right. David looked toward the horizon where stars began to appear in the sky, and he knew that the future held much to anticipate. The future of Green Acres, a place where freedom, justice, and friendship would always be upheld and celebrated.